Hello, everyone. Welcome to Social Diagnostic, the channel where we identify and examine real-world social issues facing the average person, and we attempt to analyze and reframe them into a comprehensive understanding that can yield positive and beneficial outcomes for you and people just like you. I am your host, Jess, and on today's episode, we are going to start with a topic that is probably not the sexiest topic. It's not exciting. It's not fun. It's not something that I would articulate as being overly interesting, but it is front and center to virtually everything that our world operates on. And there's no easy way to begin because we as regular individuals generally don't tend to have conversations surrounding topics like this in our day-to-day lives. These are very kind of more educational, I don't want to say fringe topics, but they are subjects that you really have to have an external interest in order to kind of get a deeper understanding of. Generally speaking. So we're going to try to peel back that veil and attempt to make it more accessible to the everyday individual, and hopefully succeed in kind of unwinding the complexities of why it seems to be so out of reach for the average person. So the topic that I want to discuss today is kind of the core thesis of my book, which is titled "The Real Truth About Inflation: Central Planning in the 21st Century" is the subtitle. So there's no easy way to get into it, so we're just going to say it. Collectivism versus individualism. And what do these terms mean, and why should you know them? So first, what do they mean? Collectivism is a unified terminology to identify certain socioeconomic structures that put the collective, the group, above the individual. So these are organizations, socioeconomic structures such as socialism, such as communism, such as fascism, such as Nazism, all which evoke all sorts of emotions, I'm sure, as I speak each one of them. Then you have individualism, which of course is the opposite, where the individual, not the group, is the dominant leading force. And conventionally speaking, we only have a few examples of true individualism. And you may be thinking democracy, but what you would be remiss to find out is that democracy is actually collectivism. So individualism is libertarianism, a republic, technically anarcho-capitalism, and then just generally capitalism. And again, as I say those terms, I'm sure you have all sorts of emotions that are rising up in you, and you have connections to these words and feelings, and you are assigning meanings to them, and I would urge you not to do that. So the reason why we're going to discuss this is because it's very important to understand that these systems control both governments and individuals. And depending on the system, that is how a society is formed. And we have modern societies, we have less than modern, more recent, kind of between the 1900s and early 2000s societies. And then we have pre-1900 societies. And there are numerous examples of many different versions of the collectivist side of these societies. However, there are only a handful of examples of individualist societies, the United States being one of them initially. Now, of course, since the development and formation of the United States, there have been more. It has become more common, and there have been offshoots and variations, and I don't want to say mixes of it, but there have been a lot of different attempts at trying to make individualism a little different than what we know it here in the United States. So I don't want to get too far off track here, but individualism in and of itself places the individual at the center of social and economic interactions. So it places the individual as the actor, the agent by which interaction and transaction occurs. In a collectivist society, the state and or political leaders are placed at the center or dominant position of both interaction and transactional exchange. So when you have, for example, a society that has a dictator, or a society that has a parliament, generally speaking, societies like that, the social hierarchy, as I say that, you can envision it, there is a social hierarchy, and we can kind of examine that through the lens of what would be commonly referenced would be kind of the British aristocracy of like monarchy. If you want to just make it easy, we'll use King Arthur. So you have your kings and your knights and your lords and your barons and your so on and so forth, right? And there's a hierarchy all the way down to the lowliest peasant, right? And in collectivist societies, that is how the hierarchy exists. Regardless of what the collectivist economic structure is, whether it's democracy, whether it's monarchy, whether it is total tyranny, whether it is Nazism, socialism, communism, fascism, it doesn't matter. They're all forms of collectivism. And each of them has a social hierarchy from which both interaction, that's your status, that's where you exist primarily because of your economic standing, who you interact with and how your interactions occur are dependent because of your economic standing. And who you get to interact with is determined by your economic standing, and your economic standing is determined by that collectivist system. Now, you can have your views of in this case, I'm paraphrasing for the individual that is justifying or arguing in defense of something, say, like socialism or communism or democracy, where they think in their head, my version, socialism or democracy, whatever it be, doesn't do that. Well, unfortunately, it does. And there's no easy way to get around that, because the socioeconomic and political structures are designed to facilitate that network of dynamics. It's just the way the system is built. There's no way around it. We can get into the individual specifics when we will about each system. What I'd like to do is transition to the individualist side of this understanding. So in an individualist society, the individual is free. So they are not set to a social hierarchical standard of pre-selection. Now, again, we can use another example. In India, they have a caste system, and you don't deviate out of your social hierarchical caste designation, as it were. And in an individualist society, there is no such thing. There is no above or below. They're all it is everyone starts out on equal footing, and that's not it's not easy to do that, because no society pops into existence with everyone just being on a uniform footing. That's not how it works. But we can use the United States as a sort of good example to that, where you had a group of people leave a country that were all relatively of the same socioeconomic status. These would be the Puritans coming to America with nothing, right? So they all came with nothing. And even if they came with wealth, gold, silver, whatever it be, titles, it didn't matter. When they got to the United States, when they got to the New World, as they called it at the time, they were all equal, because none of them had anything of value that was going to help them thrive and survive, or survive and thrive. So that was the kind of launching off point for equality in the modern world, where there wasn't a hierarchical system. There wasn't an economic system that put others above and others below. Everyone was relatively equal, and where it diverged from there, obviously, we can get into at some point. We're not going to do that now. But in the proverbial individualist society, where the ideal starting point is that everyone is equal, the question isn't what is your status. The question isn't who are you. The question isn't what do you have because of your wealth or your standing, or what your parents had, or whatever. The question is, what do you offer? And it is the only, I should preface what I'm about to say with, what do you offer, and you are not being coerced by anyone else according to a system, whether it is the state, whether it is a dictator, whether it is a group of corporations, whether it is whatever. The people, you as an individual, of your own choosing, of your own free will, what do you have to offer? And when what you have to offer becomes known, are you capable of producing it in a way that benefits not only yourself, but others, in a way that makes your and their existence easier through what we would call exchange? So this is where economics comes into social interaction. The social part of socioeconomics is, obviously there's a social interaction. If you strip away all economic interaction, all economic exchange, what you have is merely a social dynamic of individuals just interacting theoretically in a vacuum, right? There's no if we can imagine a place where needs are met, food, shelter, security, whatever it be, all of the needs are met, all that is left is social interaction, right? So when we go beyond just social interaction and the needs come into play, you need food, you need shelter, you need clothing, you need security, you need warmth, you need these things, right? Some of these things are naturally occurring, and in free, truly free societies, no one has a claim of ownership over them. In state-run societies, the state owns them. In dictatorial-run societies, the dictator owns them. The point being is that the individualist society is the only society where capitalism can exist. And what is capitalism? This word has so many negative connotations to it, and it shouldn't, because the definition has been improperly and incorrectly used for over a century now. And that is because the people who did not like capitalism chose to try to change the meaning slowly but surely over time. So if we go back to the origin of capitalism, which would be the late 1800s, pre-industrial revolution, post-Civil War era, by capitalism's own definition, what you have is, stripped down to its bare bones, someone, an individual, who chooses to create a good, thus a product, or a service at a cost cheaper, meaning with less difficulty, than their competitors. That's it. So there are extenuating components to the definition of capitalism, but that's where we need to start. So capitalism is nothing more than the ability to create a good or service for less than that of your competitors. Now, where the definition continues is that you need to be able to do that and still make a profit. Now, this is where people get upset. People that believe in socialism, people that believe in communism. You get upset because you hear profit and you think billionaire. And it's not a straight line. And what you need to understand is that the system that you think is capitalism is really what is called crony corporatism. And we'll get into that in a moment. But you need to understand that profit is not a bad thing. Profit is how a company, a business, continues to operate. So let's say, for example, you have a job. You decide that you don't like your job anymore. Instead of going to look for a new job, you decide you want to start your own business, selling apple pies. Nothing more American than apple pies, right? So you decide that you're going to make apple pies, and you need to figure out how are you going to acquire all of the components necessary to do this. Are you going to grow your own apples? No, probably not, because that's going to take 10 or 15 years to get the trees to a point where they're going to start producing. So that means you need to buy apples. If you're going to buy apples, what kind of apples are you going to buy? Are you going to buy organic? Are you going to buy non-organic? Are you going to buy GMO? What type of apples? What's the cost of the apples? How many apples do you need? That's just the apples. Now we're going to discuss all of the facilities that you're going to need. You're going to need, in most modern countries, you're going to need a place of business. When you're producing food, that means you need to meet a strict FDA standard of a certain type of environment that is food safe. This means that it has to be industrialized, sanitized. There have to be certain parameters concerning the zoning of the building, which means you need to find a building. It means you need to get rent. It means you need to find and secure a lease. You need to acquire all sorts of cooking mechanisms, whether it be ovens and mixers and dishwashers, and just the list goes on and on. You're going to need spatulas and pans and pots and bowls, and you're going to need so many things just to have the infrastructure necessary to make the apple pies that you're trying to make as a business here. What do you think that's all going to cost? Startup cost. Are you going to take that out of your own money? And if not, how are you going to get it? And this is where the capital of capitalism comes into play. Most people don't have the means to start a business because the cost prohibition, the barrier to entry, is too high. So in order to start a business, you're going to need several hundreds of thousands of dollars to be realistically profitable. And when I say profitable, we'll get back into that, but sustainable. Let's use the word sustainable. Just in order to stay in business, with not making a profit, but not operating on a loss. Because if you operate on a loss, you go out of business, right? And this is why profit is necessary, but we'll get into that in a moment. So you're going to need several hundreds of thousands of dollars just to start. There's going to be taxes every month. Your business is going to be taxed by the government not every month, but every quarter. There's 4 quarters in a year. You're going to be taxed every quarter. And you're going to be taxed a significant amount of money because that is the cost of doing business with the government. And there are very few governments in the world that allow you to exist in a business that they are not taking a very large chunk of your earnings as you make them. So you're now going to need to either work for the next 15, 20 years of your life in your job that you hate to save up enough money to go start your apple pie making business. And you can save that money up, and that's great. And if you take your several hundreds of thousands of dollars that you've saved up and you invest it into your apple pie making business, and along comes your neighbor who's got a little bit more money and a little bit more baking experience, and they open up a bakery right next to you, you go out of business, and now all your money's gone, and you're bankrupt. And the last 15 to 20 years of your life of saving is gone, and there's nothing to protect you. So this is where the capital side of capital investment comes in. You have a capital investor, a financial backer, that is going to put up the risk of the money for a share of the profits. It's risk. So this person, this entity, is going to loan you their money, their hard-earned money. They've saved for 15 or 20 years. They've found a way to produce something that allows them to generate income at a much higher rate than what you were able to do. And they've decided that they're going to trust you with their money because you have a good enough of an idea for them to invest in you. But they're not just going to give it to you for free. Would you give your hundreds of thousands of dollars that you've taken 15 or 20 years to accumulate? Or are you just going to hand that to somebody else and say, here you go, good luck, I hope it works out, and if you lose it, oh well, no worries. No, nobody does that. So there's interest. Interest is a fee. It says, I'm willing to give you X amount of dollars, let's say $250,000, but I want 10% of your profits for however long, plus my $250,000 back over a certain amount of time. So if 10 years, let's say the contract agreement is 10 years. I'm going to give you $250,000. In 10 years, I expect my $250,000 back and 10%. So $25,000 on top of it. So I'm going to make $25,000 over 10 years by giving you $250,000 to start your business. You're going to put up no capital, no collateral, nothing. And if you fail, I lose everything. Now, I'm not sure where in the mind of an individual that hates capitalism can come up with an argument that says that is such a terrible system. Here's where things break. when the deviation from capitalism turns into crony corporatism. So capitalism is that you can make a better product for less money than your competitors. And the people will choose your product. They will vote with their hard-earned dollars, their hard-earned money. They will vote your product better than your competitors by bringing their money to you for your product or service, right? Now, here's where the problem with capitalism turns into crony corporatism when left unchecked. Let's say that neighbor of yours moves in next door and they start a bakery, and they are a better baker than you, and they have more resources, and they can make a nicer bakery and a bigger bakery and a more attractive bakery, and they can make more things than just apple pies. Who's going to come to your apple pie store when the bakery next door makes cookies and muffins and brownies and everything else? They sell breakfast sandwiches and lunch and soups, and they have everything. And they also sell apple pies. Now, maybe their apple pies they may not be as good as yours, but they're not significantly less, the quality is not significantly less to the point where someone will walk out of their bakery and into your apple pie store just to buy an apple pie from you. When they're already in the bakery, yeah, I'll take that apple pie too. And it might just not have the same special whatever. Maybe they're not using organic apples. Maybe it's GMO apples. Maybe they're using a different type of, who knows, the cinnamon isn't as vibrant, whatever it be. But most people don't care. So you're going to go out of business, right? You're going to go bankrupt and you're going to lose everything. So this is where capitalism, when left unchecked, becomes crony corporatism. You, as the business owner, is fearful of losing everything. So you go to your local government and you say, I was here first. I make apple pies, and they're selling apple pies and selling all these other things, and they're going to put me out of business, and it's not fair, and I shouldn't lose because they exist. And if you're convincing enough, your government official will agree with you. And what they'll do is they will make competition against your business illegal, thus granting you a monopoly. But remember the core definition of capitalism. Capitalism is about producing a better product for less than your competitor. It isn't about vanquishing your competitor using government. And this is the distinction that matters so critically for those who cite capitalism as being this horrific thing. And they don't want to listen and hear that it isn't capitalism that is your enemy. It's crony corporatism. The corporation that existed becomes a cronyistic organism and goes to the government and uses the power of the law to prevent competition. Competition, the very thing that capitalism is about. Capitalism is 100% about competition. In fact, in a truly capitalistic society, you would have infinite variations of things. So in our crony corporatist society, what you have is Starbucks and Dunkin' Donuts, McDonald's and Burger King, Coke and Pepsi, right? There's so many examples of this duality, and occasionally there's a third, but it's never really front and center. Why? Because those entities lobby Congress, the U.S. government, to prevent competition from bringing them down. That is not capitalism. In a capitalist society, in a capitalist society, it wouldn't be Pepsi and Coke. It would be Pepsi and Coke and this and that and that and that and that and that and that and that. There would be 1,000. There would be 10,000. There would be 20, 50, 100,000. The way that, and you can see it. You can see based on the cryptocurrency market where there are something like 4 million cryptocurrencies because they are unregulated, because nobody theoretically owns the cryptocurrency market. There is competition, and the more competition there is, the more options you get. So unregulated, uncontrolled by the government, competition breeds competition. You get more variance, you get more options, you get more choices. And that's good. The consumer, as you the consumer who needs a product, wants a product, would like to have a product, you want the option of choosing the one that fits you personally the best. But when you're given the duality, the lie, the dichotomy of a false choice, Coke or Pepsi, now you're forced to choose an option that doesn't fit you or anyone. And it's not a choice that you actually get to make. It's being forced on you. That's not capitalism. That's crony corporatism. And the problem that so many people fail to identify is, well, how does this happen? How do we get there? How did we go from capitalism, where all I wanted to do was make apple pies and sell them and not have to go to my job every day and maybe make a little bit of money and have a business and, provide for my family? There's two elements that I want to touch on here. First is the profit side of it. I've already acknowledged what the cost of starting a business. Now imagine what the cost of running a business is. You need to earn a profit in order to build your business. If you just break even, your business never grows. If you make the cost of what it costs to run your business, you will always be that tiny little shop. But you want to grow. You want to go into multiple cities. You want to get into multiple places. You want other people to see and experience your apple pies. So how do you do that? Well, you need money. And you can't borrow indefinitely, because if you're only meeting your costs, you can't borrow and pay additional costs. So you need to make more. Now you can borrow and use that money to invest to theoretically grow, but now you need to give that difference back to your investor. So a profit is necessary for a business to survive and thrive. And this whole idea that profits are evil, no, profits are necessary. You are a profit. You as you having a job is you making a profit. No employer will hire you if you are not making them a profit. Why would somebody take you on, pay you a certain amount of money for them to lose money? In order for them to hire you, you have to be productive enough to add the value of the cost of your labor, which is not just your wage. There's also a cost of the labor that goes to the government. So usually an employer has to pay your wage to you, and they have to pay almost the same amount of your wage to the government. So you need to come up with double your wage in productivity in order for someone to hire you, which means you are making a profit for someone else. So profits are what pays your paycheck. Profits are not bad. Profits are necessary. You just don't like profits when you see billionaires. And I don't blame you, because it doesn't seem fair. The question you have to ask is, how do billionaires get rich? Do they get rich by stealing? Did Steve Jobs come in and steal money from everybody? Did he come into everybody's house and steal money from them? Or did he offer a product that people willingly traded their money for? Nobody forced anyone to buy an iPhone. Nobody forced anyone to buy Apple products. Every single sale was voluntary and beneficial in the eyes of the individual making that exchange. No gun was held to anyone's head. No state forced them and told them they must buy it. They willingly traded their hard-earned dollars for those products. And those products were good enough. Those products were quality enough over and over and over and over again to such a large group of people that the company, Apple, was able to turn a profit. And the more they produced, the more profit they made. So they didn't come in and you can be mad about billionaires all you want. But the reality of it is, these billionaires, these owners of these companies, who, however they get to that position, Steve Jobs obviously basically is the founder of Apple, and Jeff Bezos is theoretically the founder of Amazon, and Elon is, Elon, but none of these people steal your money. They don't come into your home and demand that you buy their product. Like it or not, you can have your emotions about it, but you cannot ignore the facts. You choose to acquire their products. Now, maybe you disagree with the price. This is where the discrepancy between capitalism and crony corporatism comes into play. So if Amazon exists, but there are no alternatives because it's a monopoly, that means that prices are going to be what prices are going to be. They're going to be set by Amazon, and you can either take it or leave it. But in a capitalist society, there would be thousands of Amazons, all competing for your business. And each of them would be trying to outdo the other for your business, driving the cost, the price of the product that you're looking for, down. Because the only way to get business is by lowering your price. If you have 10 people offering the same product, all at the same quality, and one is higher and one is lower, who are you going to go with? The higher one? No. You're going to choose the lower price. Always. That is a capitalist society. That is a capitalist mindset. The problem with the modern world of the billionaires that you take issue with is that these entities have no competition. And why do they not have any competition? Because they went into the government. The United States government is the guilty actor here. It's not the billionaires. As much as they are complicit, they are not the guilty actor. The guilty actor is the U.S. government. These are the agencies that enforce and create the laws that allow for these monopolies. And they protect these monopolies. So don't be mad at the billionaires. Be mad at your senators. Be mad at your congressmen. Be mad at your presidents. Be upset with the system of governance that allows them to rape you through your wallet for products that you want and or need, because they disallow competition. Now, here's the scary part that we are probably going to have to make a part 2 for. That is the capitalist corporate, the crony corporate side of the argument, the individualist side of the argument. Then there is the collectivist side of the argument. And this is where the crux of my book really focused on. And the point that I really tried to emphasize was collectivism and socialism are one and the same. So we can dispense with the term collectivism and we can just call it socialism. Now, why? All of the isms that I mentioned before, fascism, Nazism, communism, they are all forms of socialism. They are different forms of socialism, but they are all forms of socialism. You can disagree. I can prove you wrong. So the way that socioeconomic structures are designed is based on a graph, a diamond, if you will. Think of a square. Now turn it on its head. There's a point at the top, a point at the bottom, a point to the left, and a point to the right. Draw a center line from the left to the right and a center line from the top to the bottom. You've now cut that diamond into quadrants. On the left axis, on the upper left axis, place personal liberty. And on the upper right axis, place economic liberty. On the lower left axis, put personal security. And on the lower right axis, economic security. So on the leftmost quadrant, you have personal freedom. On the rightmost quadrant, you have economic freedom. On the right lower quadrant, those are the two upper ones. The right lower quadrant, you're going to have economic security. And in the lower left quadrant, you're going to have personal security. So you can have either liberty or security. You cannot have both. And as Ben Franklin is very famous for saying, if you sacrifice liberty for security, you will have neither. If you sacrifice liberty for security, you will have neither. So that center line that you've drawn in your mind, from left to right, everything below that is collectivism. That line itself and everything below it is collectivism. That is all personal and economic security. Everything above it is individualism. That is all personal and economic liberty. Liberty meaning freedom. Security meaning control. So everything below that center line, including the center line itself, on the lower left quadrant, which is going to be personal security or personal control, loss of personal freedoms, the lower left quadrant, farthest from economic security, farthest from economic freedoms, you're going to have your socialism, you're going to have your communism. On the lower right, for economic security, farthest from personal freedoms and farthest from personal security, you're going to have your fascism and your Nazism. The farther down you move, the more extreme it gets. The very bottom is total tyranny. Okay? So at the center, what you have is at the center of the line, if you split the two center lines, top to bottom, left to right, what you have is your modern centrist. This is the middle of the road, neither Republican nor Democrat. Now, if you want to think of where are your Republicans and your Democrats, at this center line horizontally, left to right, on the left are your Democrats, your leftists. On the right are your Republicans, your right-wingers. In the middle is your centrist. But these are all still, everything on this line is still a form of collectivism. Just below that line is democracy in the center. Just below that is democracy. Democracy is not above that line. One step above that line is actually a republic, which is the opposite of democracy. To the left of democracy, you have socialism, and even further left and down, you have communism. And to the right of democracy, you have fascism, and to the right and down, you have Nazism. And below all of that, you have monarchy, and then it's kind of, the monarchy is below democracy, but it's kind of in between. It's kind of sitting between socialism and communism to the left and fascism and Nazism to the right. It's just one step directly below democracy. And then below a monarchy, you have dictatorships, but those all exist in dictatorships are in monarchies, they are in socialism, they're in communism, they're in fascism, they're in Nazism. So you already have dictatorships. So below your monarchy and below fascism and below Nazism and below communism and below socialism, what you have is total tyranny. This is absolute tyranny. This is North Korea. This is, there are zero freedoms, there are zero economic freedoms, there are zero personal freedoms, you have no rights, you have nothing, you are a subject of total control. Okay. The reason that all of these are socialism is because socialism is state-run. And each of these entities is controlled and run by the state differently. So fascism is run by the state through corporations. Nazism is run by the state through a dictator who owns the corporations. So in traditional, obviously Nazistic historical terms, Hitler essentially became the owner of all of the corporations in Germany. Was he really the owner of the corporations? No, of course not. He couldn't be. He had to delegate, obviously, control of those corporations to the state-appointed actors. But this is the point, is that they're all state-appointed. State meaning governing. Not state as in your state, of your 50 states. State is government. So fascism is state-run through the corporations are run through the government. But the government is sort of controlled by the corporations. So the corporations use the government to enforce the laws that they want. In Nazism, a dictator owns the corporations and owns the state and uses both to control everything. In socialism, the state owns the corporations. The state, the government. It's not a dictator, and it's not the corporations owning the state, like in fascism. In socialism, it's the state owning the corporations. It's the state owning the businesses. And in communism, which has never successfully been actually tried, thank God, is the people owning the state. Now, of course, in true communism, it requires a dictator because the people can never agree on anything. So if the people all collectively own the state, and therefore the people all collectively own all of the businesses, then no decisions can ever be made because no agreement can ever be found. So they appoint a dictator to run the corporations. So the state appoints a dictator rather than the dictator appointing itself. Okay? So the reason that this is all four of these are socialism is because they are all state controlled. Through some mechanism, the economy is controlled by the state. And we use socialism as that kind of collectivist identifier. Now, if you understand anything about business, you as an individual have to make decisions. Let's go back to your apple pie business. And let's say that you want to make 10 apple pies a day, and it's going to cost you X amount of dollars, and you want to use this oven, and it's the cheapest but best oven that you can afford, and you want to use these materials, and you want to make 10 apple pies a day, and you're going to charge X amount of dollars for them. Okay? So that's in the individualist capitalist world. In the socialist world, the state is going to tell you how many apple pies you're going to make. And they may tell you that you have to make 1,000. And they may also tell you that you can only use state-appointed and state-supplied or state-approved equipment. And you don't get a say. So let's say the state equipment is not very good, and it's very expensive, as often is in state-controlled things. So the quality is going to be very low, and the cost is going to be very high, and you don't have a choice. You are forced to use it. You are forced to buy it, and you are forced to use it, and you are not allowed to use anything else. And you are forced to make 1,000 apple pies a day, because that's what the state has decided is the right amount of apple pies to make to cover the cost of the equipment and everything else that they've decided that you're going to use. And now they're going to tell you the price that you get to sell it for. So let's say you were going to sell your apple pies, 10 of them for $10. $10 a piece. So you were going to make $100 that day. But now they've decided they want to still make the $100, but they want to lower the price. Or maybe they want to raise the price. It's not up to you. You don't get to decide. So maybe you have to make 1,000 apple pies and sell them for 10 cents each to make it affordable for everybody. Or you have to make 1,000 apple pies and you have to sell them all for $100 each, because the state needs money. Now, in both cases, you can see the problem with that, right? With making 1,000 apple pies in general, it's gonna kill you. You can't make 1,000 apple pies a day, regardless of what you end up charging. But the point is that at 10 cents a piece, you can't make a profit. You can't earn a living because it's not enough money for you based on the cost of your expenses to stay in business. But the state doesn't care. You are now a slave of the state. You are in control and being controlled by the state. They have decided and they have determined that this is your role now. Whether you make money at it or not doesn't matter. You can sit there and lose money personally. The state doesn't care. And you better produce the 1,000 apple pies a day, or you'll be subject to fines. You'll be subject to jail time. You could be subject to prosecution. You could be subject to death if you don't meet the state mandate requirement. The price is irrelevant. Now, let's say it's $100 per pie, but the people don't have the money. They can't come in and buy your pies, but you're expected to sell them. What do? You can't lower your prices because the state has mandated that the price be $100 per apple pie. But nobody's buying them because people don't have money. So now what do? Well, now you're going to get prosecuted. Now you're going to get thrown in jail. Now you're going to get executed just the same. Long live socialism. In communism, it's the same but worse, because the people own the state, and now the people are the individuals that are watching you. Instead of the state showing up every once in a while, checking in to make sure that you've met your quota or whatever, now it's every single person knows what they know what you are expected to produce. They know the price that you're supposed to sell it at. And the moment that you deviate, the moment that a single individual notices that you have deviated, whether you're selling it for a little more, a little less, you're not making as many as you should, now you're instantly reported to the state by any and all individuals. In fascism, the corporations own the state. So in this case, the corporations now run your business. So you no longer have ownership of your business. What's going to happen is that the corporations, through the power of the state, are going to come into your business. They're going to take ownership of it, but you are going to run it. You are going to be the pretend owner. So they're going to force you to produce the same 1,000 apple pies a day at whatever price they determine. They're still going to force you to use their equipment. You're going to have to pay their exorbitant fees of rent and whatever other things that their taxes, whatever it be. But they're going to take all the profits. They're going to take everything, and you're going to get nothing. And you're going to be grateful that you have a job. And under Nazism, what's going to happen is that the state, it's the same thing as fascism, except that it's not the corporations that are taking control. It's the dictator taking control of your business through the corporations. So the baking corporation, which is going to be the state-owned anything to do with baking, it's not going to be, I'm trying to think of a good, it's not going to be Nestle. You know, whatever baking company you can think of that exists right now, whatever it be, whether it be Little Debbie or whatever. I'm trying to think of a good one, but the point is not that. Any baking business company corporation that you can think of is not going to come in under Nazism and take control of your apple pie business. What's going to happen is that the dictator, through the baking corporation, which is going to control all baking related entities, is going to come in and take ownership of your business, and you are going to do the same thing as you did under fascism, but that money is not going to go to the corporations, it's going to go to the dictator. Okay? So all of these collectivist societies are socialism. Now, given what I've laid out of the two options, collectivist or individualist, which one would you really want to live under? Do you want to live under a society where you are free to make your own choices, to decide what equipment to buy? You are free to decide how many of them to make, what price to sell them at. You even get to determine who you sell to. So let's say you decide that a certain customer you just don't like, you have the right to refuse service to anyone and everyone, should you choose to do so. Under a collectivist society, you do not get to choose who you sell to. You do not get to choose what you sell. You do not get to choose how you charge for it. You do not make the profits. You do not see any value returned to you. Capitalism is the only free society. And when we stop identifying capitalism as the problem, and we start identifying government as the problem, and we start identifying crony corporatism as the problem, you will see prosperity return to humanity. This has been episode number 1 of Social Diagnostic. And hopefully, you have a broader understanding of where we'd like to take this channel to and the types of discussions that we're going to have. At some point, I would like to get some guests on the show. I have a couple in mind, and hopefully they will say yes, and we can have a broader, in-depth conversation about subjects like this. These are not the only topics. There are many, and each of them is as equally misunderstood as this one. And unfortunately, each of them continues the death spiral of misinformation and misunderstanding in our society. And until each of them is adequately understood and adequately tackled, we are going to continue down the same dark road, going the wrong way until somebody or something comes along to correct us.